All right, class. Welcome to my first video that I'm going to present to you. Um, this is something that I plan on doing frequently, considering Mr. Dunwoody's not here, and I have to be able to teach 8 classes without actually being in 4 of them. So, let me begin. First off, I'm going to warn you, I'm probably going to make some mistakes during this video. Please don't laugh if I mumble at all, because things happen. So, we're looking at the Constitution. We're looking at ratifying the Constitution. And we know the Constitution at this point is supreme law of the land. And the Constitution establishes our 3 branches of government: the legislative branch that creates laws, the executive branch that enforces as well as executes the law, and the judicial branch. They interpret the laws, they make sure laws that are created are constitutional. Now, before we even have a constitution as the law of our land, our founding fathers made several compromises. And they compromised really on 3 issues before even signing this constitution. They discussed slavery, location of the nation's capital, as well as a Bill of Rights. So the first issue that we're going to look at is slavery. And the real big question was, how should slaves be counted in our population? The founders at this time supported slavery in a large degree. They weren't interested in ending it anytime soon. I mean, if you look at our timeline, we're in the 1780s. We're not going to fight a civil war to end slavery until the 1860s. So slavery is largely going to exist for another 70 plus years, and no one's going to interfere ending it. So they really just want to know, how should slaves be counted in the population? Because in the South, the population was largely half slave, half free whites. So the Northerners did not want the South to benefit in representation in Congress from slaves that do not get the right to vote, aren't considered citizens, are essentially property. But the South is saying, hey, these are still essentially people, even though they're not people that have any rights. The irony is, there. So they make a compromise and they say, we're going to create a 3/5 clause. And what this says is that slaves as well as free Africans will count as 3/5 a person for the census. So if you look at here, at the top we've got 5 white people. At the bottom you've got 5 African Americans. And you can see that only 3 African Americans are counting where all 5 count. So for every 5 people that are white, only 3 African Americans would count. Sad system, I know. Congress also discusses on the slave trade. This is how slaves are traded from Africa over to the Americas. And they discuss that, for the next 20 years, from 1787 to 1807, we're not going to vote on ending the slave trade whatsoever. So for the next 20 plus years, slaves can keep coming from Africa. They can be bought and sold. Once 1807 occurs, Congress votes, and by 1808, the slave trade is abolished in the Americas, and it's no more. So, it might take 20 years, but at least they get rid of slavery, or at least, not slavery, they get rid of the slave trade. Sorry, the mumbles are real. But the big picture is, under the 3/5 clause in the Constitution, slavery is legal in the U.S. It's going to be legal for the next 70 years. And I argue this is probably the biggest cause of the Civil War, because the founders could have taken a step forward and say, hey, this is a moral injustice. This is something that's not right. These are people, and we can end it here, but they didn't, largely because they benefit financially. A lot of these founders are slave owners, not to take away from their legacy, but this is how a lot of them made their wealth. So they're not interested in ending slavery, but some are interested in how can we contain slavery in a certain region, which, as we'll see throughout this year, that's what the big fuss about for the Civil War will be about: the rights of right of the states to either expand and choose slavery or to try and contain it. Now, the next compromise is over where the U.S. capital should be, because the states need a location for a central government to meet. Where are they going to send their representation? The big issue for this is that the North doesn't want to send their representatives down into the southern states, so they don't want a capital there. But the southern states don't want to send representation into free territory, so they don't want a capital there. So they don't want either side to be able to influence our nation's leaders. Of who are going to create national laws. So they come up with what's known as the Compromise of 1790. Basically, they say the nation's capital will be located at the U.S. held District of Columbia. Columbia is located between Maryland and Virginia. These are slave states. It runs along the Potomac River. Know that name because once we get to the Civil War, it's a very important river. But it might be surrounded in slave states, but the district itself will be a free territory since it's a federal district. So slaves can't be sold or bought in this territory. They can be brought over, but they can't stay. So slavery cannot really occur within this district. So it's a compromise. And the nice thing about DC, at least in terms of logistics, how far the representatives have to travel, it's in the center of the country at this point. As you can see over here, we've got our southern states and our northern states, and it's right in the middle for these states. So it's in a pretty decent location for people to go to. Now, the last compromise is over a Bill of Rights. Two groups emerged debating on this Constitution because not everyone was for it. Some were, some weren't. You have your Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Now, the first group that were in favor of the Constitution are the Federalists. They like it. They think this new Constitution will solve every problem ever created. They created certain legislation within this Constitution that will fix all of our problems, and there's nothing that needs to be added. It has protection for people's liberties, for the states, and to prevent corruption with government. They also like that it created a stronger central government and created a single executive, like a president, that can run things. They also voiced their opinion in what are known as the Federalist Papers, and these are over 50 essays supporting the Constitution. These essays were largely written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Now, unfortunately, not everyone was a fan of the new Constitution, and a lot of delegates actually just wanted to kind of change the Articles of Confederation because they liked that it supported the states, where the new Constitution is in favor of a stronger central government, something that they feared because they felt that a strong central government gives room for a king, and a king would then create corruption, and this would give them more of that experience that they felt with the British that they wanted to move away from. And as you can see, those that were largely part of the anti-federalist party were people like Patrick Henry, Mason, and Samuel Adams, who were part of the Sons of Liberty. These were people that fought against the British to get away, and they said, hey, this is counterproductive for us to create a system that essentially brings us back to the British system. Now, the created compromise, they say, okay, Bill of Rights might be needed. Anti-Federalists demanded a Bill of Rights. They refused to even sign the Constitution unless it was created because they need to have something to protect states and individual liberties. They want to have that extra layer of protection just in case. So James Madison, Federalists, said, you know what? You guys are going to keep crying about it. I'm going to go ahead and create first 10 amendments. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to bear arms, the right to a fair and swift trial, right to a trial with your peers, a right against cruel and unusual punishment, and any powers not given to the central or state governments goes to the people. So he said, you know what, this is not the right thing. We'll create it. People were happy. They started to ratify the Constitution. This is just an illustration of the Bill of Rights for you to see. Now, we get to the ratifying of the Constitution. Ratifying means that people sign it into law and it becomes the law of the land. And in order to do that, you need 9 states to ratify the Constitution. That is under Article 7 of the Constitution. Now, the first state to ratify the Constitution was Delaware. They basically jumped all over it. Okay, they had no problem with it. They loved it. It was the greatest thing ever since like sliced bread. And they're like, all right, we're ready to sign. Now, it would take another 10 months before the 9th state, New Hampshire, to sign. But once they sign it, it becomes the Constitution for the land. So now the Constitution resides over all the states, even those that did not sign it. The very last state, which I call the hater state, was Rhode Island. And that's not much of a surprise. They were the only state to not even go to the convention to discuss this Constitution because they really like the Articles of Confederation. They're the smallest state. They have a very small population, and they felt that they would not have protection underneath this new Constitution. So this illustration here shows all the states in the order in which they signed and ratified the Constitution, with Rhode Island being at the end, so we give them the haterade bottle to drink because they're haters.